I'm Zelda, and welcome to Drop Up, a podcast to inspire rebels from all backgrounds to pursue their hero's journey. In today's episode, I am having a thought provoking and captivating conversation with Reggie James, also known as Hip City Rage on Twitter or Substack. Reggie is the founder of Eternal, a company that focuses on powering creatives and connecting audiences. He is passionate about music, culture, technology, and writes about it prolifically. We discuss the deep rooting of apathy in our generation, taking young people seriously, and providing them the tools for youth-driven creation and expression. Reggie also shared his personal journey of self-discovery, discussing the challenges and rewards of feeling lost in your early 20s and the profound growth that can come from discomfort. My iPhone recorded video is not of the best quality this time, unfortunately, but the conversation is intact and was so fun to have. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Reggie, if we were to tell the story of your life, beginning with once upon a time, how would it start? What would we say to start with?
I guess it would start with something like, once upon a time, Reggie and Jesse, who are my parents, met on Forsyth and Delancey. And then it would just kind of go from there. But I think starting with kind of my parents and dating in 90s New York is definitely a more fun story than I was born in.
Wow.
I was born in 95. That's not as fun of a start.
So your story starts before you were even born.
Oh yeah, all of ours. It's it's the train of time, just going. And I think to our conversation earlier, embracing those references and that lineage really can help inform not only who you are, but then what you then start to mirror for other people.
Was it always obvious for you that you had this heritage growing up from your parents and your lineage?
Yeah, so I'm the oldest of three, and my full name is Reginald Bruce James the Fourth. So I think being the fourth one is kind of rare. Not many people do that now. But I think it, at minimum, made me curious about okay, I know my dad, Reggie 3. That's okay, what's my grandfather like? Reggie 2. Okay, what's my great grandfather like? Reggie 1. And any family, there's complexities there. I also think my parents are extraordinary people. My dad's the oldest of 8, grew up in Bushwick during hard Bushwick, not current rapey Bushwick. And then my mom's the youngest of 7, and her family immigrated from Dominican Republic, and there's a lot to any immigration story. So yeah, no, I think my parents were always into telling stories and was very focused on family time, and I think that's part of the reason why growing up in the Poconos was extremely family-centric, our little house in the woods. And so, yeah, I think that family history and lineage was really important to them and functionally to how our family worked.
And what was it like to grow up in the woods in a very family-centric setting?
Yeah.
What did young Reggie look like? What were his dreams?
Yeah, so growing up in the woods is funny because I think you take a lot of it for granted growing up. It was very much wake up. Let's not take school time into account, but so let's just think about summers. But it's wake up. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, which I was very blessed to have. My dad would go to work and he would commute to the city and come back. It was very much just run around outside, get exhausted. Maybe mom lets us go to our friend across the street because they had a pool. So now you're swimming with the kids from across the street. you're riding your bikes through the woods, like, because we lived next to a park that had a trail. We had a dirt bike. You know, I played golf my whole life, so like once I was older, they would just drop me off at the golf course and like pick me up at when the sun went down. You know, so you know, it changed, but a lot of it was just activities. It was just like activities to make you more of a human, you know. And then my parents are also very serious about education, and like just because school ended, education didn't end. So it was a lot of like, if you want to play video games for an hour, that means you have to read for an hour. And it's like we had to do like book reports, and like, you know, when we were younger, it was like hooked on phonics, like stuff like that. My mom has a background in like early childhood development and like psychology, so I think because she chose to be a stay-at-home mom, it's like we were her projects, you know.
Cool.
And having a mom with like a psych background, and you know, it's one of those things like, how was school today? I was like, it was fine. It's like, no, it wasn't. Tell me. It was a lot of that. But then, you know, to the more family-centric things, and so that's like growing up in the woods, but like the family-centric things, my parents were really big on like weekly family meetings and talking about, well, I saw on Twitter, someone was like, the biggest decision you make in your life, personal or work, is who you marry. And it's like, the right marriage creates like a really specific base and blah, blah, blah. And it was funny reading the comments because people were like, my parents never talked about this kind of stuff, and I realized how important this was like after X, Y, and Z, and just like, parents never talked about this kind of stuff. It's like, my parents would ask us like, what do you value in another person at a very young age, right? And they like kind of relayed that importance, albeit like, you know, we weren't going to have that decision for 15 years, but it was always a conversation, and it was always a conversation of like, oh, you're dating this girl, like, tell us about her. Why do you like her? What do you like about that value? Do you see that value continuing? Or like, all of these things were constant conversations in our home. And I don't think I realized until much later on how rare that was. And then I don't think I realized until, you know, really recently how much that saved me from like unnecessary pain, you know, whether that was like being precious about like sex, or whether that was, you know, a sense of lack of fear for like exploration, in terms of like subjects and career and non-traditional paths and taking time and meditation. Like, yeah, all these things that felt very natural to me were like really based on just like my parents' style. Not that, you know, not that they didn't have flaws or anything. Let's be really clear, mom and dad, like, you had flaws, but you know, in terms of like what they did really right, and like it was really centered around like that family structure.
I imagine a lot of self-reflection from very early on.
Yeah.
Now you work in design, you're a founder, you do lots of different things that we can explore more later on. Did you from very early on, therefore because of this environment, found in a way your path, found what you were interested in? Can you tell us more?
Yeah, so funny enough, I mean, this kind of goes into, I don't know if it's flaws, but I really wanted to be an architect, like really, really badly. And my godfather is an architect, and my parents like really discouraged that path. They're like, you have to do like all these tests, and then you don't really make that much money, and like it's such a weird path. And I'm just like, yeah, but I want to build things, you know. So I wanted to study architecture at Stanford. That was my like dream. And they're like, no architecture, no going to California, it's too far. So I was just like, okay. And I was, you know, when did The Social Network come out? Social Network came out like while I was in high school, right? So I would like watch that movie, you know, stream it illegally on like some website that was giving my computer viruses, but like, yeah, like
Right?
it's the 2010s, baby. Yeah. That's what we were doing. You know, I would watch that movie like on loop while doing homework, and so I had like, I really wanted to just like build something that would like be important. You know, this is still when Facebook was like really cool, blah blah blah. so I was really interested in that, and then I was interested, I think, because I had a very specific view on it, on like stocks and trading and like finance, because it just felt like a fun game. And you know, my family being New Yorkers, like, and growing up in like the 80s, 90s, like, they're like, that is a path towards a certain type of success, right? And like financial stability and like generational stability. So my parents really, really encouraged that, like finance in particular, because I think they understood it, right? And I did like a summer program at the time called PSGE at Lehigh, and it was like a governor school for like entrepreneurship, and a lot of them, it was also like one of my first encounters of like pretty wealthy kids, you know, like you always have an abstract view of wealth as a kid, but then you see kids that just live in wealth, and that's like a whole other thing. And so, you know, they were like talking about Penn and talking about, you know, Princeton and like all these schools, and I was always interested in schools, but like seeing the way they spoke about it was very different than the way I thought of it. I was always kind of thinking about it from like, I want to study architecture at Stanford because Tiger Woods went to Stanford and blah blah, you know, and their reference models were just different, and so that led me to being like, hey, I want to go on like a college tour, like I want to visit all these schools and see what it's about. And my parents, you know, took me up and down the East Coast to visit all these schools, from like, you know, Duke to Princeton, whatever. And I visited Penn on homecoming, and I just like fell in love. I was like, this is the most spectacular place in the world. And I applied early decision to Wharton, thinking I was gonna major in finance, and then got in and sobbed like a baby. And then, because a lot of kids from my school, you know, previously to that, you know, you didn't go to an Ivy unless you were recruited for sports. So so to the family structure thing, like I also was really blessed to have a very ambitious group of like classmates. For some reason, we all just aligned and kind of reinforced our togetherness to achieve something. And so like a lot of us went to top tier schools where that was not the norm for our high school. So yeah, I landed at Wharton studying finance, and I had a banking internship, and I thought I was gonna like kill myself. And it was really then where I told my parents, I was like, I can't do this. Like I really can't do this. It's not who I'm supposed to be. And yeah, I went back to school, designed my own major from scratch, and you know, you and I have talked about kind of just designing your own education, you know, and I had a really great advisor that helped me do that. And then it kind of just went off the rails from there.
Yeah, wow. That, I think that's something like super, well, many things are pretty common in what I understand from your story. I think that it's very common that parents have dream for their child.
Yeah.
And encourage or sometimes pressure them into these dreams, right? And whether that's the case or not, it's so common to go on a path, whether it's studying or a professional career, and realize that's not for me. But I feel like the system doesn't really give space for you to recognize that you're made for something else.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about this inflection point where you kind of realize, whoa, that's not for me, and maybe the before and after of like doing something that's not for you, and then finally finding some studies that actually make you super happy and fulfilled?
Yeah. So, I think quite early into my time at Wharton, I was recognizing like academically I was not happy, and I didn't feel necessarily like nurtured by the set of classes I literally had to take, and I didn't feel especially nurtured by like just the educational, like the environment of what it was to like learn and test, right? So that set in really early, and you know, for reasons unknown to me, for some reason the 4 years I was at Penn also happened to be a really dark time at Penn. There was like a lot of suicides in the 4 years I was there, and pretty like public ones. And yeah, there was it was some dark pressures, so I think I was already struggling with that, like, quite seriously. And when I graduated from school, my mom gave me all of her notebooks of prayers that she had for me while I was away at school. And, in reading them and knowing what I was going through, like, it aligns really perfectly. Like, my mom was very spiritually in tune with what I was going through, so that's separately a very interesting thing. So, in short, like, going through 2 years of school, extremely unhappy academically, and then really just being on the verge of, like, dropping out because I slowly started to stop going to classes. I was like, this is not enriching, and I also can't even put other things in my schedule that I think would be, because I have these requirements, and, like, the list of requirements at Wharton are really long. It's like multiple finance classes, multiple accounting classes, like all these things where I'm just like, yo, like, that's not what I came here for, and at the same time I want to make my parents happy. They're paying for my education, they sacrifice a lot for me to be at that school. It's not like, my parents do well, but it's not pay for pen without blinking well, Meanwhile, like, I remember studying with these, like, kids, and this kid was like, yeah, my parents paid for all 4 years at once because, it's actually a price discount because the cost goes up every year. And I was like, yeah, I guess it's a price discount if you could just buy what is a house, worth of education. So, it, like, that entire thing is just so wild, and coming from very classic example of, like, being a big fish in a small pond to being thrown in an ocean where for some of the fish are just made of gold, because of their parents. Like, that does something to your psyche, right? Yeah. So that's building while I'm also not succeeding in academically for the first time in my life, and also feeling a lot of just, like, dark pressure. And then it's just like, get an internship. It's the summer, like, now it's about career. It's not about exploring, or it didn't feel like I had that space to explore, I should say. And when I finished that internship, and it was just such a whack experience, it started happening there. Like, I was wearing a suit into this, like, financial firm to sit in what was functionally a closet that they made for interns to work out of. And I was just like, why am I wearing a suit to sit in a closet? That makes no sense. So I just stopped wearing suits, because it's also hot. It's July in New York. Why am I wearing a suit to sit in a closet? So I'm gonna stop doing that. And it started to really just, like, change until I got in trouble. They're like, you can't wear, like, a jacket and a t-shirt into this office. And I was like, okay. And then I remember falling asleep in a meeting, and then I got, like, really in trouble. They're like, that's unacceptable. I was like, okay, I don't know why I'm sitting at this meeting. There's nothing I do that's related to this meeting, and it just, all of the, like, it's like scales falling from your eyes. It's like, oh, this is all fake. Yeah. And then when I was just like, oh, this is made up, which also means I can make things up. And so when I went back to school, I was just like, what do I really want to do? Which started with, what question do I want to ask? And I asked myself, and gave myself permission to just ask an entirely new question. It's like, I know I need to stay in Wharton for, many reasons, and I know it'll make my parents happy, and I can sacrifice that. But, like, what question do I want to ask within Wharton? And that's when I, had my advisor, and I petitioned the academic board, and they rejected it. And then I wrote a really strongly worded letter of, like, you are blocking my education, and this system is extremely rigid. And then they approved it. and so I essentially skipped all classes that I were not interested in. I would go to my finals. I would get, like, a C, keep it moving, and then I would enjoy the classes that I enjoyed. And when I wasn't in those classes that I had, I was just reading, or, like, doing other activities, and just being, in a beautiful campus, and just kind of self-directing. But yeah, that's kind of when that was, like, the inflection point. It was really just going through a lot of pain for 2 years. and then the internship really just kind of like showed me that I really wasn't interested in that thing. And once you really just give yourself permission, because you've kind of abandoned certain status games, which a lot of like Penn has a lot of status games, even like socially, like you apply to clubs, like stuff like that. It's like I have an interest, I have to apply to show I have an interest. It's so many things like that, right? It's cool in one way because it really shows you how all of this works, San Francisco and whatnot. But in other ways, I think it's really damaging to the psyche of just like wanting to explore, not a very exploratory environment unless you go really counterculture within it, which I don't think I was like ready for as a 19-year-old.
Yeah, for sure. And did it feel like you found your path at that point? I guess until like now this has been probably some other bumpy roads taken to finally be where you are now, but yeah, I wonder whether did you find this sense of peace of okay, like I'm set on the right track now?
No, because still at the end of the semester I'm getting back like terrible grades. And I was on academic probation like twice. I will say like my now fiance, then college girlfriend, like she is really the one that kind of opened tech as a path in my mind, because she was doing like these case competitions and things that I thought were really interesting. And yeah, I mean, I think that's the honest answer. Like, I think my now fiance is definitely the reason I graduated. Like, she's the one that like kept me straight and narrow to at least finish school, and she's also the one that was like, I really think you should maybe just plunge yourself into like technology. And yeah, she really opened that door, and introduced me to like some other folks and like kind of like clubs and stuff. And so I have a lot to thank. She's held me down in a lot of ways in life, but she really kind of kicked that off. And then I think because I had free time, because I wasn't going to classes, I really just like devoted myself to going all in. And this was around the same time, or maybe a year or two after, like some really insane profiles came out. There's these New Yorker profiles, and there's one on Sam Altman, there's one on Mark Andreessen, there's one on Peter Thiel, and then there's one on Johnny Ive as he's releasing the Apple Watch. And I was just reading those profiles like all the time, and I was just watching all the YC like YouTube videos, and I was just going so in, like on just consuming less about like this is how software works, and just more about like tech culture, and like that distributed Silicon Valley mindset type of position. And that's when I really started to be interested in that as a path for myself. But I still wanted to be in New York, which I think was also a tension, because I was just like, what are the things happening in New York? And it wasn't necessarily the things I was like interested in from a tech perspective. So that started a whole new tension and angst, but a much more productive and healthy one.
Wow, yeah. Interesting. It seems to me that you're part of many worlds, and you weave those worlds, fashion, music, technology together. What did you find in technology that felt so special to you?
I think I think the impact is just different, and I also think what really appealed to me was how seriously technology takes young people. And that's a function of that kind of like Facebook era mentality, but also Steve starting Apple, they were quite young as well. You know, that's naturally an insane story. But yeah, I think it was just how seriously they take young people. And what I despised about finance was how I don't feel like I was taken seriously at all. I think fashion, I think Penn just, you know, it's just not school for that, so it didn't feel open. It was always like a personal interest. Like the first thing that I, you know, created was like a style blog that it will not be named on this podcast because I don't need people like diving into that. And you know, I was really interested in photography, and I would kind of make like small accessories. So that was like, you know, my first like kind of creating things, and I started that in high school. But yeah, in short, like I don't think I nurtured fashion enough from a professional mindset. It was always just like personal, and I really loved it. Similar to writing, like that's just personal for me. I don't need like an economic benefit from it. I think that taints a lot of things. But yeah, I think the impact of technology and being taken seriously as a young person to make that impact, or at least to be given the resources to try without being babysat. I don't think anything really exists like that, you know, and that's kind of why, at least so far, I've devoted, I mean, all of my, I guess from like 19, 20, like my life towards that work.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with that. I was talking with another guest, Daniel, on the podcast, and we were talking about how school and society in general makes it so hard for young people to become adults and to find their way to be autonomous and try. I mean, that's nothing new, right? But I definitely think, and I would love to hear your thoughts about that it's a big part of why the young generation is struggling, because they're really lacking this trust and autonomy to try things out and be taken seriously. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think young people are struggling, at least from an American perspective, for a lot of reasons. You know, they've just kind of seen crisis after crisis happen. You know, I think about myself, at least, you know, being born in 95, I was like old enough to remember 9/11, the subsequent, you know, actions of that, from a U.S. perspective, you know, followed by 2008 financial crisis, followed by our first black president being replaced with Donald Trump. Not calling that a catastrophe, just saying that is like a shock to the system, you know, to just leave politics aside. COVID, like all of that makes for a really interesting storm for like a 95 baby like myself, right? And I'm 27 right now. Then I think about my sister she's 11 years younger, she's adopted, so it's been really interesting to watch her development, right? She just turned 17, and so seeing her like lose 2 years of core school where a lot changes in your body, in your like social relations, and autonomy of like going to a concert by yourself, like that, you lose 2 years of that off the rip, you know. And what that does, let's just say between the years of 14 and 16 or 13 and 15, it's crazy. It is, we cannot overstate what that has done to her generation. And at the core of that is a loss of autonomy by a larger, you know, catastrophe, right? COVID was a catastrophe. So yeah, you know, part of me doesn't even want to blame like some institutional setup for it. I think young people have lost it simply through a force of nature, you know, through an act of God. And that is really, really hard to bounce back from, you know. And I kind of see it now, like she's starting to form more taste and opinions. And I can see like how fast it's happening in her, right? Where I think without COVID, it would have been significantly more gradual and smoother. you know, and she's like thinking about taking what is that called when you don't go to school right away?
Gap year?
Yeah, gap year. She's thinking about taking a gap year, you know, which never would have flown in my house, like, for me.
Yeah.
But I think my parents are really in tune with the fact of, like, no, you need a year of just, like, being autonomous without going back into 4 years of school, you know? So I think that, combined with just, like, the new environment of, like, technology and social and where we are in the world, you know, very different than, like, when I was talking about earlier, like, growing up in the woods, and it was just like, all right, go run into a tree outside. Like, that's not, part of that was just like, I didn't have a phone. I didn't have a phone until, like, 7th grade, something like that. You know, that's just not true anymore.
Yeah.
And my phone was a flip phone, you know, like let's be really clear. My parents didn't buy me, like, the first iPhone. They, like, got a flip phone from Target and had, like, you know, pay as you go ass, you know, calling card type beat, you know. So that it's just so different. So different. I remember getting my first iPhone. I was hyped, you know. So to start off with an iPhone and, like, the social relations that puts on display at such a young age, like, then you, like, have the COVID thing, and, like, the autonomy is so wild, because autonomy is also, like, autonomy from, like, your peers, you know. Right. And I think, like, at least for me growing up, like, autonomy from your peers is partially because you're not consuming them 24/7, and now we consume our peers all the time. You know, that does something to your brain, right? That there is a loss of autonomy there because of just desires for fitting in and social pressures and wanting to have a girlfriend or boyfriend and seeing, like, a friend post with, like, a boy or a girl. Like, you didn't see that growing up. Like, you would go to school and someone would be like, oh my god, they kissed in the woods at that party. It's like, they kiss in the woods? Like, it's like, that's crazy, you know? But, like, you weren't inundated with it. It was, like, news, you know? So I think that's, like, that's part of, like, the autonomy thing, in my opinion. You know, because when that was happening, I was just running in the woods, like, hitting sticks with sticks, you know, while those kids were kissing in the woods. Like, there's a certain level of autonomy there and, like, discovery, I think. Yeah.
Cool. I would love to elaborate a little bit on that whole. You often talk about the apathy that we're experiencing on a cultural level, at least in Western countries. And so I would love to hear more of your thoughts on that, specifically on the younger generations that we're part of. What can we talk about apart from autonomy that's impacting the younger generations in breaking through the apathy?
I mean, I feel like the apathy just really stems from feeling like there isn't a path to change anything, you know? And again, I'm gonna keep it to, like, American examples, but it's just like, when you see a senator that's, like, 90, you're just like, can I even talk to that person? You know, the person that is, like, forming, like, the laws and institutions that I have to move through, it's like, can I even talk to that person? You know? And tech has done a very good job of insulating itself from interaction, like human interaction. I think, you know, that abstraction from a system that you engage in every day, right? Like, tech is an environment. I think that drives it. And then, again, COVID didn't help, you know? That's a very hopeless thing. I'm stuck in my house. I'm, like, on Zoom for school, and I still have to go to school. The world is burning, and I still have to go to school. Like, that, there's that whole thing about, like, does the world shut down if aliens land? It's just like, I don't know. Do I have to go to work on Monday? Because if I do, I really don't care, you know? And it's just like, everyone was dying in the world, and I still have to go to school on Zoom. You know, like, I think, of course you're going to be apathetic. You know, you don't have agency there. You don't have autonomy. And I think, to my point about tech taking young people seriously, like, I think we need a larger cultural awakening to taking young people seriously. Period. You know, I don't necessarily know how that happens. I don't know if it's, like, some magical Don Draper-esque campaign, but I think that there's a real responsibility for anyone under 30 that has like resources to build anything, like part of that mission statement has to be like, we take youth seriously. We take youth culture seriously, you know. And that's also kind of like the power of I think that's why like TikTok and YouTube are such a thing, because like there is nothing stopping a kid with a phone to creating a video, expressing something, posting it, and seeing its resonant value. And I think, in short, we need more tools that allow someone to create something, right? Media is the lightest form.
Yeah.
But create something, launch it, and see its resonant value. You know, like that is such a virtuous flywheel when you have the resources, right? So I always think about like, what are the new resources for youth-driven creation? Because that, I think, is like upcycled to creating more than one Greta. What's that environmentalist? Greta.
Oh yeah. Greta Thunberg.
Yeah, I don't want to mispronounce her last name. But yeah, her. Like we need like 1,000 more Gretas with much differing opinions and ways to achieving said thing, you know? But like that starts, I think, media and kind of understanding its resonant value is really lightweight way to start. But that needs to like continually upskill into receiving more resources to make larger impact that is not just like consumable media, you know. Yeah, I think that's why music is always such an important cultural tool, right? Because it's a young person's game, and like I forget which one of my friends said this. Oh man, one of my friends said something like, rappers are motivational speakers. Like we don't have like public speakers anymore. You know what I mean? We have leaders. We have rappers, you know, and they have messages. Like we have musicians and they have messages, and that helps us act, you know.
Yeah, artists have always been playing a huge role in activism and creating social progress, right? Yeah. What you mentioned earlier, the notebooks of prayers that your mom gave you when you were going through a hard time, and I often read some of your writings talking about spirituality, and I wonder if you see spirituality, well, what's your relationship to spirituality maybe growing up and as of now, and if you would consider that as a tool to break apathy.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm Christian. My parents work in ministry. You know, growing up, it was very much like they would do kids' church or what have you. And then that kind of leveled up into short-term missionary work. So I lived in sub-Saharan Africa, specifically Zambia, for 2 clips. One was like a 3-month trip with my whole family, which is when we adopted my sister. And then the other, I went with just my dad to a bit more of a remote location, and we were literally building like churches in the bush. And those churches acted as like community centers, basically, naturally, as a lot of religious institutions do for communities. Yeah, now that I think about it, it's funny my dad didn't want me to be an architect, and yet took me to remote building projects. Anyway, so, you know, my Christianity goes like very deep, and, you know, that is all I know, you know, spiritually. And I think like any kid raised in a Christian home, you kind of like fall out of it, then you kind of have another coming to Jesus moment, you know, and then, you know, who's to say where it goes from there. But I actively consider myself Christian, and, you know, there's like the meme of like white pilling, you know, which is like when you kind of fall down like the internet Christian rabbit hole. You know, I spiritually believe in the message of the cross, and I think that has a lot to do with how I perceive, you know, light-based narratives and redemption stories. You know, I always believe in the power of redemption. I think if you do not at minimum have that value of you can continually be redeemed, you create a very kind of like dark cycle in like just how you view other people, and that helps break apathy, Like the idea that something can be redeemed gives the basis for hope. And if you do not have hope, I don't know how you're going through I really don't. And so it's hard, right? Naturally, if I came on a podcast and I was like, yeah, no, the way that we fix youth culture is we make everyone Christian. No one's gonna, everyone's gonna be like, and that's enough of that, But I do think, broadly speaking, like we have to believe that things can change. Redemption is about believing that a thing, ideally yourself, can change into a more attuned, aligned version of what you can be, right? And that is the basis for like a lot of my personal work.
Beautiful. I'd love to talk more now about Eternal and building a company in your 20s. Maybe to start with, what's Eternal about?
Yeah, Eternal is really about powering creatives and connecting audiences. So, we have a few core functions. One is our media arm, which does on the street interviews and really kind of going into subcultures and communities and kind of environments, mostly like live shows, and just kind of doing like scene reports and like talking to audience members, talking to artists at times, and understanding why they're there, like what makes this artist click for them. And I think that I wrote this tweet a really long time ago, and I was like, the mirror is the final product. Like once we made the mirror, the only thing we've ever tried to do is make mirrors. The phone is like an extremely addictive mirror. The internet is a huge mirror. So this kind of acts as a mirror to like those audiences, and it's a mirror that takes them seriously. We never will approach an audience, no matter how bizarre the thing they might be congregating for is. We're not going to take them ironically. We take them seriously and their passion seriously. And I think that's really rare, right? Like how many layers of irony do we have to put on something at times? Like, let's just strip that back and understand why these people have chosen to congregate, right? So we do media. That's a whole thing, and that's like really the part of the core of the brand. We have an app called Eternal Plus that does ticketing for events that we put on and partner with. Also within that app is this product called Club Eternal, which is virtual shows. You can imagine it as like a Club Penguin rave. I grew up on Club Penguin, really have a soft spot for like live virtual environments. And so, artists live stream into that environment for their communities, and it's like social and fun. So that's really exciting. And then, naturally we kind of just have like a very operative arm of like physically doing things, which is work. But that's what it means to like power artists and creatives, right? And so, just building a lot of software and then creating a lot of creative branded media, and trying to return to this process of technology companies knowing how to talk about themselves. I think we've really lost an ability to talk about ourselves, and then we leave it to scammer space, unfortunately, and then we wonder how come crypto isn't resonating, or how come people are afraid of AI. It's just like, okay, well, if every other tweet with a product launch you see on your Twitter feed is like, you're gonna get left behind unless you integrate these 7 things into your life today, it's just like, yeah, that's why no one trusts you. Engineer boy. It's like, you gotta learn how to talk about yourself. Or broader, we need to do a much better job talking about ourselves.
That's interesting. That's, the main intention here with this podcast, to recreate new myths, new stories about people that are intimate and genuine, maybe away from the noise of like Twitter threads on how to be more productive or whatsoever. But coming back to Eternal, it sounds to me like you really built a product that looks like you, that's very personal. And I wonder if you could say a few words on what was the journey to get there.
Yeah, so When Luca and I first met, so we were introduced by our friend Cami, who's the founder of Parade, and Luca and I talked on the phone a couple of times, and then I flew out to LA and like slept on his couch. Never had met him before. We really just sat down and talked about identity for a really long time, and we started as like an avatar company, thinking about like next gen social. How as a kid that's growing up on like Roblox and Minecraft going to like age into something new, we didn't feel like it was just going to be another flat Instagram, joint. And so yeah, we built like this pink world, and it was like really beautiful, and like the whole idea was like making an Animal Crossing world as easy as making a group chat. So like you would share this world with your friends, and you can kind of do like mini games, and there was voice chat, and that launched during the pandemic, right? So when we went out to pitch the metaverse, everyone was just like, that's not real, right? This is like January 2019, like literally getting laughed out of the room type beat, not actually getting laughed out of the room, but like that was the tone of the note. And then of course fast forward, and everyone's like, metaverse this, metaverse that. It's just like, yeah, that's funny. It's such as life, such as technology culture.
Yeah.
But so yeah, we were really focused on that. But I think that we didn't have like the mature product bones of understanding iteration. Sometimes we designed ourselves into a corner. And I think we got really stuck on like launch like a beta, public beta or private beta, have really good results, but not fully the like explosive results that we want, and not knowing how to iterate into that. So we would just start from scratch. And candidly speaking, we burnt out an entire team doing that, and we lost that team. And it was during the rebuilding phase of like a product that was like had a lot more legs, and that it's what folded into the virtual events product. That Luke and I really sat down, and we were spending 2 months in LA. And we were like, if we could just do anything we want, right? Which you always can. Hack on life, you can do whatever you want. Like, what would we build? Like, if we really took off this restraint of like our pre-seed funded thesis, like how could it look more like us? Because that's what's going to give us the energy to do it until we die, And we took a real bet on like the things that we were feeling coming out of the pandemic. Part of that was just like that story of like the kid that hadn't gone to a concert yet, and they were now 17, and while having artist friends who were like kind of like stuck by the label, right, and not getting the support that they needed to just do a pop-up show. And that is what really started to form this new opinion of what we wanted Eternal to be, and that that bridge between giving resources to a group of creatives that were under supported, and then understanding like potentially just like what new youth culture could look like, and like could a tech company do that? I still think that's a really open question. Like, can a tech company sit? Steve Jobs used to talk about the intersection of like technology and the liberal arts, and then basically we've ran that narrative since he said that, right? Like, I think Eternal's really unironically trying to be at the intersection of technology and culture. Can you actually do that? I think is a really open question. I can't pretend to say yes 100%, but it's a question that like I'm willing to put a lot of energy into, and of course that comes with a certain level of behind doors critique about myself or Eternal, but yeah, I've heard worse things. So.
Yeah, I love that you talk about this intersection about technology and culture, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, this really speaks to the way you decide to live your own personal life. I find into fashion, like interested in fashion, your faith, music, and tech. Would love to hear a bit about your side quest and music.
Yeah.
We mentioned it before the interview. How did that happen?
Yeah, so I mean, although my parents don't like play an instrument, it's a very culturally like a very musical house, and we were always playing music really beautiful music and love for just like the arts. And then the Poconos has a really just like incredible homegrown art scene and like a lot of jazz and stuff. And so, yeah, I played piano for a really long time. I was in percussion, like in orchestra or whatever, my entire yes, and from like 5th grade onwards, something like that. Excuse me. And my brother's a musician. You know, he took it like really far. And I think between like doing, you know, theater growing up, musical theater, and in high school and in college, like in New York, I was really missing like a musical creative outlet. And you can't, like, playing piano, that's a very personal thing. I'm a very social creature. I didn't really have the space to like find a little jazz trio, nor was I really that interested in that.
Yeah.
And my co-founder Luca, you know, DJ since high school maybe. Yeah, he's been DJing for a while, you know, and he really just started bullying me. And he's like, "You need to DJ. You need to get with it. All like your biggest, you know, influences, like they DJ. You know, Virgil DJs. Like, you come on, aren't you gonna be Virgil?" And so yeah, he really just kind of like bullied me into DJing. You know, classic, you know, friend right there.
Yeah.
But you know, once I kind of got over the meme of it and wasn't self-conscious about the meme, like I really love DJing. I love seeing that audience reaction. I love crate digging for references. I love thinking about my parents, you know, going out to clubs in the 90s, you know, before I was born, and what might they have heard in a club, you know, what might they have heard at Palladium on 14th Street, you know, founded by Ian Schrager, same founder of Studio 54 and Public Hotel. What might they heard at, you know, a more rap-centric club in Brooklyn, you know, from like my dad's angle. What my mom be hearing in Dominican clubs, you know, like I love thinking about them in New York at like a really important time in culture and New York history, and crate digging with that in mind, you know. And then of course like looking at like my contemporaries or my peers, you know, we were talking about Maxim earlier. It's just like, yeah, what's getting played in a Paris club? Let me find out. Or like my friend Eugene in London, it's like, what's getting played there? Let me find out. You know, that's really informed. You know, shout out to Luca for forcing me into DJing, but it's really rewired my brain. You know, 2 tables and a mixer. That is like an unbeaten technological, you know, invention right there. Like what that does to the entire frequency of a room, to people's brains, like to your own brain when you're doing it, when you're looking at waveforms for 2 hours straight, something special happens, you know. So yeah, I really love DJing, you know, and you know, I'll do it for free. Like you fly me out, I'll DJ and I'll fly back the same night. Like I love it. Like that's the side quest for sure.
Wow. And it sounds like, I mean, that's a side quest, but that has a lot of sense with your main quest, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It, you know, it, you never, or let me not say never, but like I think it's always so dangerous when, for me to treat it more than a side quest, because I think the critique isn't worth the squeeze. You know, like you know, already being like a Black founder, and I really try not to make like race like part of like my founder narrative at all for a lot of reasons. That's a whole other podcast, but like, you know, I'm like very keenly aware of already being kind of fashion centric, DJing, living in New York instead of SF. Like all those things kind of work against a perceived sense of seriousness of how serious are you about technology, right? And I think that's something that I'm really trying to just crack in the psyche of broader technologists. And so, yeah, it's like, it's obviously really related to eternal stuff, right? In the office, we have a speaker tower, like a hi-fi speaker tower, and like turntables there. The first thing you see when you walk into our office, right? And that's a real statement. Our office is also on the ground floor on the Lower East Side. You could just walk in. That's also a statement. Like, I'm really tired of like the ivory tower mentality.
Yeah.
And so, it's related. I have to like continually work to keep it a side quest because I think the critique is funny, but I don't know. It's a really hard relationship at times. You know, I think holding a complex identity publicly is not a lot of people are afforded that luxury. And I think, you know, the nature also of, you know, existing online is one of, you know, a compressed consumable identity. And to show the many sides of self or, you know, whatever like that, there are risks to that, particularly if it's not core zeitgeist, or at least, you know, tech zeitgeist. You know, I think from a broader cultural sense, like, it's almost expected. Of course you would DJ. Of course you'd be into fashion. You know, like, the playbook has been laid out for us, you know, but I think, you know, that hasn't, because technology culture focuses so much on optimization, that doesn't seem like an optimized life, right? Being at the club and playing music doesn't seem like an optimized life, right? However, you can rationalize the way the references kind of come back into your work and how that makes your work more interesting, right? Objectively speaking, I think there's a lot of heavy lifting to be done there, and yet at the same time, people wonder why, you know, technology hasn't really had a like music industry win. You know, like I think there's all these like funny things about not wanting to embrace cultural tools and language, and then wondering why certain things in our culture seem to work the same way it's done for the past 50 years, you know? It's just like, well, if you can't kind of hold these cultural tools in your hands and know what to do with them, you know, you're going to continue to have that question, right? And then if you discredit those that are trying to make that bridge happen, well, you're going to keep being stuck with that question. And then you're going to also wonder, it's like, why aren't kids inspired by, you know, tech founders anymore? You know, it's a very specific kind, right? Yeah. Versus like, how come certain fashion people or music people, like, you know, seem to have such power in what they say or like some of their larger creative practices. It's like, you're shunning the tools of the culture. You're shunning the tools of the youth, you know, and you're trying to get them to buy freaking Pepe coin, you know, like this is the trade-off that you're playing with, you know, and I just think it's all very interesting.
Yeah. What I hear is that, well, my interpretation of what you just shared is that by going with your complex identity and holding those different side quests, you do contribute in making it possible for more people to do so too. I feel like we need more people being visible in their polarities and side quests and complexities, and so I find it very inspiring. You've written many times for young people. I think it's very inspiring in particular for young people who ask themselves whether to follow their side quest or not. And you've written many times for the youth, the Black youth, and I wonder what message you would like to share with them as a conclusion for this podcast. Maybe, let's say, for someone in their 20s, feeling lost with their path, some last nuggets of wisdom that you'd like to share.
Yeah, you know, I think if you're in your early 20s and you're not feeling lost in your path, like, I really hope you have something figured out, because odds are maybe you should feel a little lost, you know? I had a span of time when I was 22 where I was just kind of like sitting in my little, apartment in Red Hook, and like my heater was broken. I was just like eating spaghetti and coffee because that's like all I could afford. And I figured out a lot during that time, just like reading and writing, and that took me 3 months, and it's okay to have that time and space. And I had the privilege of knowing I could kind of go back home if I needed to. Not everyone has that privilege. But I think the only way that you really kind of figure that out for yourself is taking the time to figure that out for yourself. And that oftentimes means like, hey, maybe you gotta leave that finance job or consulting job, or maybe you gotta just not be working, And I think a lot of things hold us back. A lot of things within our ego hold us back from being irrelevant for a bit. And this is something I've been meditating on. It's like being irrelevant for a moment in time is really powerful because you don't have any eyes on you, and that relieves or should relieve a lot of pressure. I think that's like my broader thing for youth is like, it's okay to be invisible for a bit, like you actually kind of want to be invisible when you're figuring things out, because to have eyes on you or perceived eyes on you at all times, it's kind of like that thing with like having a camera on. You fall into a sense of pose, and extended pose, you cramp up, and I think like specifically for Black youth and figuring out, where they fall in, let's just say in broad capitalist society, and like where they put their energy, I think there can be a sort of apprehension to going into predominantly white environments, and I think that it's really, unfortunately, it's kind of necessary to take on some of that discomfort. I think there's a lot of advice to the contrary, but I don't know how much good that does, because we're going to be still lacking those, references, those figures that become examples for the next set, the same. Also, ideally you put the ladder back down to make that easier, again, this is speaking from a place of privilege, but the privilege that I have had of being a young Black founder and venture backed by some of the best people in the industry is I've been able to put down that ladder for my peer group, and folks that did not see venture as part of like their life story of building, and that's something I take a lot of pride in, and I plan on doing more. And it's not through a thesis of like give underrepresented folks money. It's from a thesis of like, I believe my peers do good work, and good work deserves to be, resourced. And I think that, I think Black youth are going to be surprised to see that work for them more than they think it won't. Obviously not every story is going to be the same. Obviously you're going to like run into brick walls, but like having a network of peers that are all pushing together, someone's going to get through the door, and then they're going to reopen the door, and sometimes that won't be you, sometimes it will be you, sometimes you're going to need to ask for help. Never be afraid to ask for things, that's something that I teach a lot of the young people that work at Eternal. Please negotiate with me. Everything can be negotiated. Everything can be asked for. I might say no sometimes, I might say yes, I might point you in another direction. Ask for what you need, ask for what you want, don't be shy about it, put yourself in the room. A lot more doors are open than people think, but a lot of mental models work against thinking that that's true, Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Beautiful.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Please leave a comment, subscribe to the pod, send feedback or suggestion of guests you would like me to have in the future. Really means a lot. If you're looking for more content on how to navigate life as a young hacker, founder, dropout, or unconventional being, you can also follow me at Zelda Poem on any social media, but mainly Twitter. See you next time.